Morning. As Brother Dan said, we are in Joshua. We have 13 chapters this morning, so it could be well into this evening service by the time we get done. No, I think probably not. I think people would walk out long before that, so we won't do that to you. This may feel a little bit more like a Bible survey as opposed to a lesson this morning. The focus of the Sunday School Quarterly is Caleb. Caleb, one of the 12 tribes. He and Joshua stood in the face of the 10 spies that came back with a bad report about entering the land of promise. They came back with a good report. They agreed with the other 10 spies and said, yes, it is a land of milk and honey, and yes, there are giants there, and yes, there are walled cities there. That's all true. But God has promised. And by faith, they sought for Israel to follow God's command and go into the land. Again, so as you look at this morning, you know, there are some people that love history. There are some people who don't like history at all. They're very bored by it. There are so many lessons in these chapters, there's 13 of them, that we're going to skim through this morning. We won't be able to hit on all of them, but like I said, it'll be more like a survey. We'll pause and we'll talk a little bit about certain areas of it, but a lot of it we'll just sort of summarize as we go through. And again, this is part of the 10-year plan for the Sunday School. I like it because it keeps us moving through the Bible. But again, I strongly urge you, study your Sunday school lessons before we come together and have your own Bible study in addition to that. If all you get is out of the Sunday school lesson books and what's preached behind the sermon, there is not enough time on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night to get what you actually need from God's Word. You need to implement your own Bible study daily and stick with it. There is so much for us to learn, and you won't learn it reading it once. You know, you can go back time and time again, and there will be additional things that you'll learn from it. So, again, I'd encourage you. As we look this morning, we'll begin in chapter 12. The title lesson the Sunday school writer gives is Caleb Fully Following God. And again, his focus was really on that section concerning Caleb. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Caleb is a wonderful example to us as to the faith that is required of us in our daily lives, looking to God to provide. Too many times we're defeated before we ever started because we don't rely on God, we rely on ourselves. So, as we began in chapter 12, we're going to go ahead and read the first 6 verses, if somebody would read that.
Even unto the river Jabal, which is the border of the children of Ammon. And from the plain of the city of Chemeron, from the east, and unto the sea of Edom, even the salt sea of the east, the way to Beth Jezreel, and from the south unto Ashdod, Pisgah, and both of Og, king of Bashan, which was the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth and Edrei, and reigned in Mount Hermon, and in Salcah, and in the Bashan, and in all Bashan unto the border of the Geshurites and the Maachalites, and half of Gilead, the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Then did Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel smite. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave it for a possession unto the Reubenites of the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh.
All right. So as we began to look at this, chapter 12, Joshua here is rehearsing for us or repeating what has already occurred. As before they entered the land of Canaan, before they ever attacked Jericho, they had already come against Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og of Bashan, king of Bashan. Those kings decided to rear up against the children of Israel. And in doing so, God brought the children of Israel to defeat those two kings. These were powerful kings, powerful nations. And it sent the first wave warning to the Canaanites that lived in the land of Canaan of the God of Israel. It was really some of the first testimony that went to them. How powerful were they? Well, I mentioned they were great kingdoms. They were larger, indicated larger than the children of Israel. Physically, the children of Israel could not have overcome them without the hand of God. They were in walled cities. They had weapons of war and trained soldiers. The children of Israel were slaves that had come out of Egypt and really had no weapons to speak of, not like unto the other nations. And it was the hand of God that delivered them to the children of Israel, and they defeated them. Og himself is one of a few of the race of tall men known as Rephates. Deuteronomy 3 and 11 indicates his bed was 13 feet by 6 feet. That is king size. Yeah, how many of you get frustrated that your feet hang over the end of the bed? It's just not built, well, some of us don't, but I'm sure Brother Dan, Brother Jacob, some others probably, well, he didn't have that problem. You probably wouldn't have that problem either. That was a large bed. But it gives an idea of the size of some of the fighting men of the land. Who was it that asked that they receive that land as a possession? Not Caleb. It's on the east side of Jordan. Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. Half tribe of Manasseh. But Moses granted it based on one condition, and what was that? That's right. They couldn't just settle into the land and then leave the others to take the land of Canaan. They needed to go over and fight with them also. And so that agreement was put in place. Now the next verses, 7 through 24, just goes through and lists the kings. In the first 6 verses, you have 2 kings on the east side of Jordan, and then the rest of the chapter gives the kings on the west side of the Jordan River. That land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. All right. We go on from there, and stop me if you have comments, questions. And somebody will probably be able to help you with the questions. Chapter 13 begins to go into land that had not yet been conquered. Somebody read the first 6 verses of chapter 13, if you would.
From Shinar, which is before, even unto the borders Amalekites, and Ashkelonites, Hittites, and the Ephraimites, also the allies. From the south, all the lands of the Canaanites and Moab, that is beside the south Sidonians, unto Athens, to the borders of the Amorites, in the land of the Gibeonites, and all Lebanon, toward the sunrising, from Elgad under Mount Hermon, unto the entering into Hebron, all the inhabitants of the hill country, from Lebanon unto Mizpah, I don't know. Then will I drive out from before the children of Israel, only divide thou and divide not unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee.
Okay, so going back to chapter 12, again, verses 7 through 24 list the kings on the west side of Jordan that had been defeated already. 31 of them are named there. However, it was not all the cities. They had not taken all the cities. These were most of the major cities of the land. But there were still cities that were under Canaanite control and lands that were under Canaanite control. God here, he acknowledges Joshua's old, stricken in years. But he says, go in and assign the land per the inheritance. They had not taken the land yet. They had not signed it out. They were still, they hadn't followed through with God's command. Okay, there was more to do. And so he said, assign it out, give it as inheritance, and then those tribes would then continue to drive out the idolatrous worshipers in the land, to purge the land and make it all one under God. And so he goes on and lists here. Now, it was important that they continue, that they not stop short in God's command. Too oftentimes, we ourselves tend to do that. You know, God will give us instructions and we'll take it so far, but then we stop for one reason or another. Maybe we feel weary. Joshua was stricken in age. Maybe we're concerned that what God is asking us to do is too much. But is he asking it of us that we ourselves would accomplish it? Or is he telling us to obey him and he'll accomplish it? What was the promise of God in going into the land? I will drive them out before you. But they had to follow in obedience his commands. Too many times today, we want to measure success by end results. God doesn't want us to do that. He wants to measure our success by our obedience to his will in our lives. Too many times as God's people, we look at attendance boards and offerings, and we look at numbers, and we say, well, this is a great big church. This is a little bitty church. This church is doing so much, and this church is not doing anything. That's not how God measures things. God measures by our willingness to follow as he's commanded us to do. We look around us, and oftentimes we're defeated before we ever started because we see a world that's full of wickedness. And we think in our own minds, well, what impact am I going to have? We feel overwhelmed by the wickedness that's out there. And certainly today, if you watch the news, the world is full of wickedness. Maybe beyond any point going all the way back to the days of Noah.
God considered the end result, the avenue by which the end result, how we praise it, when Jesus Christ had a failed mission to begin with, because his end result was he was crucified and died on the cross. So our end result, we don't need Jesus. Is God, who someone who God looked down his son, perfect sinless son, his entire life, as humble as it was, God looked on him, the greatest of all, because he had no sin. So we don't need to base our lives on our achievements, but on how we follow the Lord. The land where the Israelites are today is just a small fraction of what God gave them. God's capable of giving them all that land. The only reason they don't, it's not God's fault. It's man's fault because he dropped them all.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us today, again, don't look at numbers up here. Sometimes I wish we didn't have those numbers up there because it can become a discouragement. Look to God. God is in charge of the success, the numbers. If we will do what He's commanded us to do, then we've accomplished what He's asked of us. And we need not worry about the numbers. Think about Noah. Noah and his sons worked on the ark for how long? And he preached. And at the end of it, the missionary and his family were all that were saved from the flood. Now, among many ABA people today, Noah's work would have been a waste. They would have diverted funds from that and put it into something else because we want to see numbers. We want to see church growth. In the end, it's what God wants that matters. King Saul, he went up against the Amorites and they defeated the Amorites. He came back with bleeding sheep and cattle and King Agag. And the people looked at it as a great victory. But what did God think of it? God had told him not to take anything, but to kill all. He was disobedient in his work. He was working out of what he thought instead of what God thought. And God didn't measure that by success, although many people today would have. So, we have examples. It's important that we're obedient to God's commands to us today, not following our own thoughts and ideas. Now from there, in chapter 13, verses 7 through 33, the kings on the east side, Sihon and Og, had already been defeated. This really establishes the borders and the inheritance for the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And so it goes through, verse 7 says, "Now therefore divide this land for an inheritance unto the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh, with whom the Reubenites, Gadites have received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond Jordan eastward, even as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them." And then goes in to describe those borders. We won't go into that. There is one other thing I'll call out here, verse 22. We remember studying previously about Balaam, that prophet that Balak tried to get to curse the children of Israel. And time again he went back and inquired of the Lord. And the Lord told him no, that the children of Israel were his people. But what he did do was he told Balak how to get the Israelites to turn from God and to turn to Baal Peor. Here in verse 22, Balaam, also the son of Beor, the soothsayer, did the children of Israel slay with a sword among them that were slain by them. So we'll see Balaam, who sought after material wealth, and we see that over in the New Testament. We see that his punishment, his judgment was yet to come. And here we see the results of it. Then goes on in through the assignment of the borders. Balaam was slain along with the other idolaters of the land. Any thoughts, any questions? One other note, verse 14, and then again in verse 33, when giving out the allotments or the inheritance of the land, verse 14 says, only unto the tribe of Levi he gave none inheritance. The sacrifices of the Lord God of Israel made by fire are their inheritance, as he said unto them. Verse 33, but unto the tribe of Levi Moses gave not any inheritance. The Lord God of Israel was their inheritance, as he said unto them. So what are we being told here? Who are the Levites? The priest. They're one of the 12 tribes, but they didn't receive a portion of the land. What happened with what would have been their portion of the land? It would have been 1/12. There was another tribe that received 2 portions. Who was that? Joseph's children, Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay, they received 2 portions of the land. So what about the Levites? I mean, that portion of the land was to provide for them. That's right. And it'll actually go into more detail later on, but the Levites, those that served the tabernacle and the things of God, were to receive what they needed from the people. They were not to go begging. They were not to live in poverty. You know, we're fond of saying the just shall live by faith. Pastors should live by faith. Well, certainly they should, but part of that God has given to his church to provide for his men, and we need to make sure that we're doing so as God would have us to do.
They represented what Jesus Christ was. When Jesus Christ came, he had nothing. In this world, he came humble.
Yeah.
He came to that world, not as a servant. But when he comes back again, back in the whole this time to serve the priest tribe, the rest of the tribe were designed to be servants of God. For the purpose, the sole purpose of the gospel, not to have anything else in life into them.
So the issue is they would become entangled in the land, that their attention would be placed on the land instead of the things of God. And it's spelled out later on in the scriptures. When we get there, we'll probably go through that. And I've got other verses to apply to it. No, that's okay. That's okay. It is touched on in these verses. So, all right. Chapter 14, and you notice I'm really getting everybody else to read these because there are some terrible names in here, and I just as soon somebody else trip over them than me. Chapter 14, again, goes into establishing the division of the land. Now, it's going to talk about dividing by lot. What is dividing by lot? Yeah. Yeah. Now, as I looked at this, they were going to send out, they did send out representatives to survey the land. And they came back with their surveys of the land, and they separated the land, and then they random, we would call it chance today. What's the difference between chance, as you think of with cards and dice and all of that, and what they were doing under the leadership of, and I'm giving you the answer, under the leadership of God? When they chose lots for the apostle to replace Paul, was it random? It was vote. It was to be led by whom? Popularity? Above that, God. It wasn't roll the dice. Now, this very well may have been what we would look at as a random. However, God was in control. So, whatever this casting of lots was, it was under the direction of God with the outcome according to God's will. So I just wanted to call that out as we're going through this. So here we have Eleazar, the high priest, Joshua, and then the tribal heads that would come together and they would determine a distribution of the land to the 9.5 tribes. Again, according to what God would have them to do. When we conduct our business, are we supposed to be imposing our will? God's. So it's very important that we look to God for that direction. When they began to discuss this, you'll find in verse 6, then the children of Judah came unto Joshua in Gilgal, and this is where they'd been camped, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said unto him, Thou knowest the thing that the Lord said unto Moses, the man of God, concerning me and thee in Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in mine heart. Nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses sware on that day, saying, Surely the land whereon thy feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance and thy children's forever, because thou hast wholly followed the Lord my God. Now, what is he leading to here? That's right. Now, what's significant about that? They were the giants. He was 40 years old when they went in to spy out the land. He says he is how old now? This is 85. How many of you are 85? Almost. Well, we may feel it. How many are ready to take on giants in battle, in warfare? We did some work yesterday. I was ready to go home, relax. And we really didn't, we cleaned up a little bit in the other side. Yes, on the other side of Jordan. We did a little cleanup in there, and we painted some stripes. We didn't get them all done, but I was ready to go home, and I had a lot of stuff to do. But I'm 21 years younger than Caleb, and to go up on the mountain to fight an entrenched, fortified group of people, giants, warriors, that's a lot to take on. How many of you would have the courage to do that? Well, if we place our faith and trust in God, and that's what He wants us to do, God will take care of it. In our witness here, I'm guilty of this. I complain, we're a small church, Lord, and there's just us. Now you go out further and there's O'Fallon. There are some other churches even further out, dispersed, but here in the immediate St. Louis County area, this is it. 3.5 million people. How in the world, Lord, could we take on? And St. Louis is a wicked city. But you don't have to stop there. Look all around us. There's wickedness. Do you feel intimidated sometimes? I sometimes do, and I want to complain about it.
But in all actuality, David, by right, should not have been able to take down Goliath.
Oh, physically, for certain. Yeah.
Something that seems physically impossible to man. God,
Yeah. Why was Goliath there anyway? Because Israel, as we're going to find out if we get that far, Israel didn't follow through as they should have in the land. That's why Goliath was there, and that's why David wound up having to deal with Goliath. And not just Goliath, but Goliath's brothers. Evidently, there were 7 total that had to be defeated. So, all right. So, Caleb says, Moses promised, where I walked, where I journeyed, that land would be mine. And that land was this mountain. 85 years old. What was his faith? That it didn't matter how old he was. You know, he describes himself as being strong here in these verses, but was he basing, verse 11 says, as yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me, as my strength was then, even so is my strength now for war, both to go out and to come in. Now, what was he basing him coming back victorious on? Yeah, it wasn't on that strength. He was strong enough to obey God, to do what God wanted him to do. But in verse 12, now therefore give me this mountain whereof the Lord spake in that day, for thou heardest in that day how the Anakim was there, and that the cities were great and fenced. If so be the Lord will be with me, then I shall be able to drive them out as the Lord said. What is the task that we've been given today? Go preach the gospel. It's that simple. For the Israelites, go into the land. And as you go into the land, I will drive them out for you. Now, we're not driving people out. We are confronting enemy, but the enemy is not those people. We're recruiting from the enemy those people, telling them about Jesus Christ and his blood that was shed. But it's our job to go and to do. And too oftentimes we refuse to. We'd rather sit in our homes. We'd rather do the pleasurable things of this life instead of the things of God. But what's going to happen down the road? Like I said, I'm 64. I'm not promised a day. What's going to happen to whatever I may have accumulated? But yeah, it's going to go to somebody else. My kids will get all the debt. No, I'm kidding. We're so focused on amassing things on this earth that we don't lay up the treasures that will last forever. 2 Timothy 1 and 12. If somebody would turn there and read that. Somebody else, Romans 8:31. And someone else, Psalm 118:6. And one more, Proverbs 29:25. Who has Romans 8:31? Anybody go there? 2 Timothy, go ahead and read that one.
Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, for I know who I am. Believe and
So Paul writing to Timothy, what does he say? Summarized. I'm not ashamed of it. I trust in him who delivered him from the rages of sin. Romans 8:31, anybody have that? Is that not the philosophy, the faith that Caleb had here? And that we should have in our daily lives? What about Psalm 118 and 6? Do you ever fear? You know, I'm concerned about the world today. There are places that I won't go. Some places I'm not anxious to go to in the daytime, much less at nighttime. I have fears for my kids and my grandchild, hopefully grandchildren, somewhere down the road. But I have fears concerning their physical well-being. But I'll be honest, I have more concern over their spiritual. I don't want any that I love to suffer death and hell. And therefore, it's imperative that we step beyond our fears, have confidence in God to do what He's commanded us to do. Sometimes that means going into places like Caleb that may be dangerous, where we may be confronted. Proverbs 29:25. Go ahead and read that one, if you got it. He'll take care of us, even in death. You know, were there any Christians that suffered violent deaths? Oh, yeah. There have been many of them down through the years. Many are recorded in the scriptures. In the Dark Ages, some 50 million, it's reported, died because of their faith. We're not promised that we won't die because of what we believe. But through it all, God will carry us through. We have to rely on Him like Caleb. Faith in God is essential for us to have overcoming lives. You can just, as a Christian, you can just go along to get along. But in the end, what significance will your life have? If you want to have an impact in this life, follow God. Be courageous like Caleb. We need men. Brookside needs men who will stand up and do as God has commanded us to do and be willing to go into the teeth of the battle. I don't know of any of our churches that aren't looking for men that are willing to do that. Luke 9:23 tells us, take up our cross and follow Him. Jesus said those words. Any other thoughts or comments? I know we're moving fast. Chapter 15. This is territory allotted to Judah. And from here, we're going to go through a lot of territory allotments. We won't spend a lot of time. Verses 13 through 19, it records Caleb defeating that city which is called, I thought I wrote it, Kirjath Arba, which later became Hebron. And then after defeating that city, that region, he then makes an offer that that would go up with him to defeat Debir, which at that time was Kirjath Sepher. He would give the hand of his daughter. who stepped up for that? Yeah, Othniel. Othniel was Caleb's brother's son. He, along with Caleb, they went in, they took the city. Caleb followed through and gave his daughter Exah, who in turn asked for springs of water in addition to the city there. Now, what father can deny their daughter? Not many. And Caleb didn't either. And so he gave her both the upper and the lower springs. Even at that, they still came over every night for mom's cooking. I'm kidding. I added that. Does anybody know who Othniel is? Other than, yeah, he was the first judge of Israel. You find that over in Judges. Verses 21 through 62, the cities of Judah are named. They number 114 in 4 regions: the Negev, the lowlands, the hill country, and the desert. And then verse 63, it tells us that the Jebusites remained there in Jebus, which we would know as Jerusalem today. They were not able to drive them out. Was that because of God? No. Again, God promised, but we have to follow through and obey. So they remained there and remained a thorn in their side until when? Yeah. It wasn't until they went through all the judges and through Saul, and it wasn't until David ascended to the throne that they went in and they overtook the city. It's recorded in 2 Samuel 5 and 6. All right, any other questions, thoughts on 15? We're moving fast now. All right, chapter 16, 17, there's a couple things to note here. So this is the allotment of territory to Joseph. And we already talked about Joseph. His allotment was split between whom? Yeah, Manasseh and Ephraim. Who was the oldest? Who would normally receive preferential? The oldest would, right? Who was the oldest? Manasseh. Who received preferential? Ephraim. Why was that? It was God's will. Yes, ultimately it was God's will. Because back when Jacob gave his blessing, he switched hands. And he gave the blessing to the younger and not the elder. Is that the first time that had ever happened? Who else received the blessing? Jacob over Esau, Esau being the first. So anyway, Ephraim is mentioned here before his older brother. He received the blessing of Jacob instead of Manasseh, who was the firstborn. Verse 16 and 10 indicates a problem. What is that problem? Somebody read that. So what are we being told here in this verse? Yeah, they let him stay. They made him pay tribute. They were subject unto the tribe. Is that what God commanded? No. No. And in fact, we'll see in a little bit that it comes back on them. So we have the assignment of Ephraim's inheritance. Also Manasseh, 17 and 1, Manasseh was split between the east side and the west side of Jordan. This was the only tribe that was split like that. Half the tribe on the east, the other half on the west. Call out 17, 3 and 4. Let's read that. If somebody would do that. Again, there's names here, so I'll let somebody else read it.
are the names of his daughters: Allah, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they came near before Eleazar the priest, and before Joshua the son of Nun, and before the princes, saying, the Lord commanded Moses, give us inheritance among our brethren. Therefore, according to the commandments of the Lord, gave them an inheritance among the brethren of their fathers. What verse is it?
3 and 4. All right, so this actually goes back to Numbers chapter 27. The situation was we have a man who had no sons but had 5 daughters. And they went to Moses, who was leading the children of Israel at the time, and said, our father has no sons. Who received inheritance at that time? Sons. Sons. They asked Moses for their father's inheritance for what purpose? To continue his name, his inheritance within their family. Okay? Moses took it to God, and what did God say? What they asked for is right. They should receive of it. And in addition to that, he gave a pattern for the inheritance of land. It would go to the sons. If there were no sons, it would go to the daughters. If there were no daughters, then who would it go to? The family of the brother. If there was no brother, then it would go to the brethren. And if there were no brethren, then it would go to their kinsmen. It was to stay within the tribe. Okay? That was established because of this request. God acknowledged, God approved, and God established the law whereby that would be followed. It was because of these 5 daughters, these women, that was put in place. Now we go back, we talked about not driving out the Canaanites, chapter 17 and verses 12 and 13. Yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. Yet it came to pass, when the children of Israel were waxen strong, that they put the Canaanites to tribute, but did not utterly drive them out. Again, it is a failure on the part of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh not to completely drive out the Canaanites. I guess they were a little bit of a gnat. Canaanites, as God had told them to do. So what did they do? What was Ephraim and Manasseh's, the tribes of, what was their response? They went back to Joshua. Verse 14, the children of Joseph spake unto Joshua, saying, why hast thou given me but one lot and one portion to inherit, seeing I am a great people? For as much as the Lord hath blessed me hitherto. So what are they asking? What are they saying? They're making a statement, and then they're giving their request. What is it? Yeah, we are the equivalent of 2 tribes. We didn't get enough. We are a great people. What was Joshua's answer? Yeah. First thing he says is, if thou be what? A great people. If thou be a great people. What makes people great? Well, a lot of us, it's within our own minds, but it really is God working through. God working through. Now, most of the time, people like that don't think of themselves as great. But they're recognized of God. Paul didn't think of himself as great. What did he call himself? The least. Chiefest of all sinners. They claim to be great people. Joshua says, if thou be great people, then get thee up to the wood country and cut down for thyself. Clear. You have property. It's part of your inheritance. Clear it out. There's more than enough space. Clear it out. But also, cut down for them in the land of the Perizzites and of the, here's that word, giants. If Mount Ephraim be too narrow for thee. And the children of Joseph said, the hill is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites that dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron. What are they saying? Excuses, they're too powerful for us. Lord, I can't go out and witness. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to make fun of me. They might even call me names. Eventually, we're going to receive some real persecution, according to God's word, if we stand for God. They have chariots of iron, both they who are of Bethshean and her towns, and they who are of the valley of Jezreel. And Joshua, now, what tribe was Joshua from? The tribe of Ephraim. He's responding to his own tribe. Now, you would think Joshua, if he has a favoritism, it's to his own tribe. What's the problem with playing favoritism? You know, we want to do it with our kids. Could create jealousy. They'll turn against you. What does it do to them? You know, when we shield our kids, when we treat them different, and don't get me wrong, yeah, I love my kids. I loved them enough to spank them when they were small enough to spank. But if we're not careful, we damage our own kids because we have lower expectations for them, and we shield them from what they need to know and go through in their life. It's something we have to be careful of. Joshua here could have said, okay, we're going to do this special thing for you guys because you're mine. But in the end, it wouldn't have helped them at all. Our kids need to realize that life is not fair. They don't get equal portions just because of who they are. They're not shielded from the downside of life. You can't be there for everything that's going to happen in their life. So what do you need to do? You need to prepare them. You need to train them. You need to work with them. Don't shield them. When they get out from under your control, then they're going to be subject to the wolves that are out there. And so you need to work with your kids to teach them, to train them, and prepare them for what they're going to face. Ephraim. Here Joshua tells them, verse 17, Joshua spake unto the house of Joseph, even to Ephraim and to Manasseh, saying, Thou art a great people, and hast great power. Thou shalt not have one lot only, but the mountain shall be thine, for it is a wood, and thou shalt cut it down, and the outgoings of it shall be thine. For thou shalt drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots, and though they be strong. Joshua's confidence was in whom? In God. And he wanted them to recognize their confidence needed to be in God. And we're 5 minutes over. Wow. Oh, you've been trying to tell me the whole time? Huh. Yeah, it does. All right. Any other comments? 19 continues. Survey of the land for the final 7 tribes. Also, the appointment of cities of refuge. Who is our refuge? God. Jesus Christ is our refuge. We need to rely on Him. And the cities of the Levites. Again, the Levites were not, and we didn't get there, so it's a good thing you brought that up.
I got one comment.
Yeah.
And step up to the cause